This is like a galaxy of superheroes or something here. Woo! So,
we're about to be interrogated.
So I'll hand it over to David Heilpern to start the interrogation.
Okay, thank you. Can I tell you, this is an historic occasion, I think. Never before have we had this number of either ex or actual parliamentarians sitting on stage committed to drug law reform. Yay. You know, I was part of the group that put together the very first MardiGrass. I spoke here in this hall, and if we'd thought then that we would have a bunch like this, it's the wildest dreams come true, and we're grateful for you each being here, and of course for all the participants who've come to listen, to speak, and to exercise their rights in an environment of legal hostility. And it's greatly appreciated that you all take the effort to come here and support this cause. What I think I will do is just start by getting everyone to introduce themselves and just give two-minute rave about what they do. My name's David Heilpern, and I'm the Dean of the Law School at Southern Cross. Before then I was a magistrate for 22 years. And one of the main reasons I left was my inability to keep on with the drug laws in general, but specifically the drug driving laws, which are, as we've been discussing all day and for the last few MardiGrasses, a real problem. I said this morning, I see this I have this nightmare, which is probably unrealistic, but that we get David's bill up and we all go Queensland with decriminalisation and everything's exciting and prescriptions get many, many more and it's all fantastic, but no one can drive. And that's a nightmare scenario for me. But let's start, who's got a mic? Everyone's got a mic. Let's start from Cate and work your way this way and tell us who you are, what you're doing here and what your role is in this movement.
Thanks, David. Hi, everybody. Cate Faehrmann, MP in the New South Wales Upper House. I'm the spokesperson for the party as well on drug law reform and harm reduction. In the last Parliament, I had a suite of bills that I introduced to basically reform the law when it comes to drugs in New South Wales. So I've spoken here a couple of years now about our taxing and regulating, in fact it's just regulating now, but legalising cannabis bill. I've established an inquiry that David, in fact you didn't get to present to it in the end because we couldn't find a time where we could get David Heilpern's availability, unfortunately, but we had an upper house inquiry as well into the outrageous drug driving laws. I've got a bill as well on that. Pill testing, what have you. Essentially, we made it a priority in the last Parliament to really go out and talk to the community and advocate for as much as we can in the New South Wales Parliament to push what was a really terrible government on drug laws. We did what we could, and I'm very excited to talk about next steps in this new Parliament. We've all got one.
Hi, I'm David Ettershank, one of the three Davids on the panel, so we'll make it easy for identification later on. I'm one of the, apart from one of the three Davids, I'm one of the two Legalised Cannabis Party candidates who got up in the last Victorian election. We've just finished our 5th week of sitting, so we're still trying to figure out how the place works. As we say, the label's on the tin, as to where we stand. Although I think on our 2nd day in Parliament, we moved a private member's bill that was initially championed by our friend Fiona Patten, which was a reform to medicinal cannabis and principally the right to drive. So hopefully, David, we're going to be in a position to share some good news on that one later in the session. But that's what we're about. Basically, we're at that trying to find our way through the Parliament, figure out how's how. With the Greens, with Animal Justice Party, we hold the balance of power in the upper house and we intend to use it.
I'm Sue Higginson. I'm one of the Greens New South Wales Upper House members with Cate Faehrmann, my colleague. I'm from Nimbin. I was at the first ever MardiGrass when we all marched down to the police station in protest, and one of my secrets is I am one of the original Gunja fairies. There you go. No. It is true.
Once a Gunja fairy, always a Gunja fairy. You know?
I became a lawyer when I was living in Nimbin. One of my first clients was a 60-year-old woman here from Nimbin, and I had to represent her for smoking a joint. From that day on, I have honestly made that firm commitment that my life will be with my colleagues, and before I go, we will have changed the law. So not one 50, 20, 15, 35, 75-year-old woman has to stand in the Lismore court and say, "I'm sorry, Your Honour, I had a joint." So I will be working in the next term of Parliament, which is just about to start next week. We've got some very exciting times ahead, and I will be supporting Cate. I'm also the Justice Portfolio holder, and obviously at the moment the 16 to 20,000 people that are being dragged through the New South Wales criminal justice system for no proper purpose whatsoever and having their lives absolutely hammered, destroyed, and their families, enough is enough. So yeah, I'm part of the plan to legalise it.
So I'm David Shoebridge, one of the 11 Green senators in the federal parliament. I'm the federal justice spokesperson. I'm a recovering state MP, so I spent about 11 years in the state parliament, and in that time had the police portfolio, worked with Cate on a number of the drug law reform pieces of legislation we did, prosecuted the case on roadside drug testing, and also, together with the Young Greens, run the Sniff Off Facebook page, which is all about identifying where police drug dogs are and campaigning to end that appalling program of police drug dogs. I'm now the federal justice spokesperson for the party. We have a federal bill to legalise cannabis for the whole country. It's never been tried before in the federal parliament. We're excited by that. Submissions close on Monday. I think there might be some flyers around to talk about that. We actually see this as a collective effort from our party, working at state and federal together with colleagues and allies from around the parliament to actually finally get this done. We're super excited about the prospect of legalising cannabis for the whole country in one go as soon as possible. And I'm also one of three Davids, and it reminds me of being in class 3B at Normanhurst Public School again. Thanks very much.
Hello, my name is Rachel Payne. I am a legalised cannabis MP in Victoria in the Upper House, along with David Ettershank. I just want to also mention, so legalised cannabis in Victoria, the party only has been around for a short period of time, but what was really exciting for me as someone who consumes cannabis and is probably considered a self-medicator since I was a teenager, I suppose, is that finally there are so many politicians talking about cannabis. It's awesome because I don't want to be criminalised anymore, and that's why I'm here. But also, when I helped get the party registered, I was talking to so many people, particularly medicinal cannabis patients, and what we need is agency in our space. And I think for me particularly, it was we need to change the laws around accessibility and allowing people their medicine and not being discriminated against. So I really hope that we can get some work done, and it's awesome to collaborate with so many amazing other politicians, and I look forward to talking more about it. Thank you for having me.
Hello everyone, I'm Fiona Patten. It's my tradition to spend my birthday at Nimbin now, so I see MardiGrass as my birthday party, really. I was in the Parliament for 8 years. I'm no longer in the Victorian State Parliament. But during my time in the Parliament, I initiated one of the medicinal cannabis driving legislation that led to a task force that made a series of recommendations that has now led to David and Rachel's bill that has received very positive feedback, and I think today I think they'll be able to report back on the progress that has been made around medicinal cannabis patients and driving especially. while I was there in the last term, I chaired the inquiry into the use of cannabis, as well as the inquiry into the criminal justice system. Now these two, and then before that, the inquiry into homelessness. And it was so interesting across all three of those inquiries. Now, the use of cannabis, obviously, we received nearly 1,200 submissions and I think 2 opposed reform. But in homelessness and in the criminal justice system, all of the experts and the health experts and legal experts all agreed that if we are going to address our criminal justice system and if we are even going to address homelessness, we need to decriminalise drugs. And we put up a bill, I was with the Reason Party and prior to that the Sex Party, we put up a bill last year which was around decriminalisation. Decriminalisation is a difficult word for politicians because it means something different. So I initiated the decriminalisation of sex work in Victoria, and that means something very different to the decriminalisation of drug use. So we did a diversion bill that was around the compulsory diversion of everyone who was caught in possession or use of any drug. That went to an expert task force. That report was not tabled prior to the election, but I'm hoping with the power of these 2 fine MPs, we will wrestle that out of the Minister's office. And post-election, post-Parliament, I'm on a Medicinal Cannabis Industry Association board. I'm on a justice reform and hoping to keep contributing to drug law reform as well as general justice reform.
Holy shit, eh? What a panel. Now, because we've got a lot of expertise here on New South Wales and Victoria and Commonwealth, before I turn to them, I want to just focus on 2 things. First is Queensland, and second is the TGA and the importance of their recent ruling. In Queensland, there has been a surprising development since last year, and that is effectively the decriminalisation of possession of all drugs, not just cannabis. First time, you get a caution. Second time, you get a drug referral. Third time, you get a drug referral. Fourth time, you go to court. And that applies to possession of all drugs. There are some problems with the exemptions. There are some problems with the amounts, but basically it came as, I don't know to you, but it came as an absolute complete shock to me that Queensland would do this. Not only that, on the same day they announced that they would be having both fixed and roving pill testing. I wrote, of course, that means that all the festivals in northern New South Wales that put client safety first will, of course, have to move over the border to Queensland now if they're serious about that. The reasons behind this are complex. I won't go into it except to say that there was a trade-off with some terrible legislation relating to Aboriginal young people. But the fact is that this is an extraordinary development where Queensland now is ahead of New South Wales in terms of drug law reform. I mean, Joe would be rolling over in his grave. That, I think, is an extraordinary and really important development. It feels like a bit of a domino, and it feels like the arguments against an imperfect but nevertheless better model wither away when you look at what they're doing, and particularly in Victoria and New South Wales, where the balance of power is very much on balance in favour of drug law reform. So that's Queensland, and I think that's exciting. Federally, we also saw the TGA approve psilocybin and MDMA, albeit in a limited way and albeit by prescription, and albeit against the wishes of the AMA and of the psychiatrists' lobby groups. This is really important in my view in terms of cannabis drug law reform. The reason I say that is because if psychedelics are going to be able to be available by prescription and thus medicalised, it makes our argument about cannabis a hell of a lot easier, because they've always been considered the heavy, more dangerous, blah, blah drugs, and this is the softer, gentler drugs. And that's reflected in maximum penalties in the criminal justice system as well, that distinction. So I think it's very important in that it shifts the debate. And and certainly if any of the panel have anything they want to say about that, then they'll have a chance. But equally, Queensland effectively decriminalising possession of all drugs makes the whole cannabis issue a lot easier to argue for. Because if that's the case with ice, if that's the case with ecstasy, if that's the case with psilocybin, etc., then it makes our task, I think, easier and is a really important step in the right direction. So that's Queensland and that sort of federal slight diversion. And I know there was a panel here yesterday with some expert opinions on that. I should just say on that, there is a huge move to push back and get that reversed. It's being led by the AMA and by psychiatrists. It's being led by some researchers in the psilocybin and MDMA field, and we must resist that fully because any backward step is obviously a big backward step when it comes to drug law reform generally. Reflecting on what Sue said about representing the 60-year-old, it's worth keeping in mind before we move to the panel that 60-year-old, who's probably now 70, could stand up here and could now be a prostitute, decriminalised. Could now be engaged in euthanasia, decriminalised. Could now go and get a prescription, or very shortly, for psilocybin and for MDMA, but could not smoke a joint. She could cut her own arm off on stage, but she could not smoke a joint. So this ridiculous situation is ripe for change. So I thought I'd just start with David. David, that was a fantastic explanation of what you're doing in the federal sphere, and it came as a big shock to me that I'd never thought of it. So I'm disappointed about that. But how's your discussions going with other political parties? Because it's exciting to get the bill up, but as Kate's experience has shown, getting the bill up and getting it through are different.
Yeah, so good question. And I too was excited by Queensland and what happened with the TGA. I think there was some discussion that Queensland felt very anxious about doing nothing in the space and they were going to do something. No one thought they'd do that, so that was actually good. In terms of legalising cannabis federally, when we launched our campaign, I think it was September of last year, we actually had a media strategy which had a whole lot of good news here and the good story. And then we had a media strategy ready for when the right in politics and the right wing of Labor and the coalition came out and smashed us and attacked us. And you can't rely upon the coalition for anything, right? They refused to attack us. They just lay down and were silent and said nothing, which has been their position, the coalition's position, since we've launched it. They've said nothing. And the reason they've said nothing is they know how bloody popular it is across the political spectrum to legalise cannabis. And I think they feel kind of silenced and awkward about it. And interestingly, what we've seen from Labor, federal Labor, and we could do another whole panel on, the disappointments of federal Labor, but what we've seen from federal Labor is this interesting statement that's come out from the Attorney General is they have no current plans to legalise cannabis. So our job over the next 12 months as we roll out this campaign federally is to change Labor's plans from no current plans to legalise cannabis to they can't withstand the demands for legalising cannabis. And I've got to tell you, the online submission that we've put out, if you're running a parliamentary inquiry and you get 200 or 300 submissions, it's astounding, right? You say, wow, we've got so many submissions. That submission, that online submission thing that we put out about 6 weeks ago, last time we checked, had 8,500 full completed submissions on it. Like there's a huge amount of national support. So our plan is to change Labor's from no current plans to legalise cannabis till they can't resist it, and we hopefully bring it to a vote next year.
Great. I'm so excited. Excellent, thank you. Now, what's the situation in Victoria with respect to drug law reform and drug driving law reform? Where are we at? I do have a little quote from your learned Premier, What we want to try and do is make sure that everyone and anyone who would be better off with medicinal cannabis has no disincentive and in fact is supported to access their medicines that will alleviate their pain. That was in response to a question about drug driving. So where are we up to? Perhaps Rachel?
And what a quote that was. I mean, when a Premier comes out stating that they want to get to some sort of resolution, particularly on something that is quite complex, looking at road amendment laws, and the Premier just came out and basically beat us to the chase of our press release that day, and so we just walked in thinking, did he just say that? It was a really positive first step for us, and it gave us that assurance that the government is starting to, the rhetoric's changing. And we noticed when we brought the bill to debate, we had both sides of politics supporting this, and the conversation has shifted to, oh, what about the children, or what about the road tolls, to these are medical patients. How do we have laws that allow someone on other types of medication to be fine and not be prosecuted for using their medicine, but someone who's using cannabis, there's just an instant black cross against your name, even if you're clearly not impaired to drive. So I guess I can run through some of the steps that we took to get to that point. And we have been working with a lot of experts. We've been working with community. We've been working with a lot of the other MPs. And the ministers who are involved. So police, road safety, the Premier, all do want to come to some sort of resolution, and all come from different places of what they want to be resolved. So we've actually put to them the bill, had the debate, and now we're at a point where we're negotiating what a trial may look like. And so we're trying to be really sensible in that approach, because this is something that, although Tasmania has laws that allow for a medical defence, and there has been, the ceiling has not fallen in and the road toll has not increased in any dramatic, any seismic way, there's been no shift whatsoever, we've got the evidence there to show, look, this works. How do we get you over the line to agree with us? So we're looking at things like a zero blood alcohol limit would be one of the requirements potentially, because we know that that could put someone at risk of potentially being impaired if there's alcohol involved with medication. We're looking at the fact that it's a point of prescription. So your doctor is the person who advises you how a medication will interact with your body. If you're starting a new medication, please don't drive for 2 weeks, for example. If you take your medication at night, you will wake up and not be impaired. You will be fine to drive. So that advice that is provided by doctors, we want that to be acknowledged and certified in its legitimacy. Another restriction that we thought we needed to probably place in a trial environment would be that provisional licence holders would be excluded, because young drivers or new drivers, inexperienced drivers, would probably be at a greater risk potentially. So just alleviating any of those concerns, particularly when it comes to road safety. And we know that there is a point of prescription tool that both pharmacists and doctors can use to provide that correct advice that has been orchestrated by road safety authorities nationally. So we know that these conversations are being had. It's just about, I guess, being brave and taking that next step with it.
Thanks very much. And look, on reflection on that, I get a lot of people coming up to me and saying, this is shit, you're just supporting medicalisation of cannabis. You're just supporting, what about our bush bud? What about those of us who just want to use, who want to sleep well at night, grow a couple of plants and smoke them without the drug driving laws getting in the way? I don't need a script. And look, I agree with you. I really think that that's right. The point is that how are we going to get this legislation through? And the answer is tiny steps. And this is a stepping process. All at once would be wonderful, but unrealistic, I think. Are we selling ourselves out by doing a medical model as an exemption to the drug driving laws? Only that much. Okay. Is there anything that you wanted to add on the Victorian situation before we moved on?
Yeah, I might just add that, there has been some really good discussions.
Closer to the mic.
There has been some really good discussions, and there is a high level of paranoia amongst the politicians, primarily about there being any spike in road fatalities, despite all of the evidence internationally and as far away as Tasmania that it doesn't happen. But we did discover, or we were advised last week, that based on the discussions that this will be going to Cabinet, the Victorian Cabinet, and that will happen, we hope, in the next month or so. We've asked them not to be too prescriptive, because I think the one thing that terrifies us is that they'll come back with something that's crap, and then we'll be told, well, that's what's gone through Cabinet. So we're looking to refine and further work through the trial process. But in terms of the process of actually normalising a practice and treating medicinal cannabis like any other medicine, we think this is a big step forward. And a lot of the initiatives that we're looking to pursue over the next 12 months are all premised upon attacking this same concept of normalcy from different angles and making the progress that way. But if we can get through Cabinet, I think we're well on the way in this first major step.
Thanks for that. And I think also we shouldn't, I don't know why Tasmania doesn't have this impact, perhaps because there's a sea border, but the truth is, if this gets up in Victoria, with such a large land border with New South Wales, it's going to be very difficult for other mainland states to remain immune from change if one significant large mainland state rolls over in the right direction. And now...
So can I just add to that, David?
Please,
just for people to acknowledge that there's also federal work being done at this level. So there's road safety working groups with representatives from the AMA and from a range of areas. And as Rachel mentioned, there's some very detailed guidelines for doctors now from the National Transport Commission, but they're also still working on this and recognising that it is unfair. So I think in many ways we've won the argument, and now it's just how we regulate it.
Brilliant. That's great. So that's where we're at Victoria. Now, where are we up to in New South Wales? Kate.
Thank you. Yes, Fiona is right in terms of we've won the argument, absolutely. And that was what the debate on the bill, that the Greens bill that we debated in the Upper House last year after we had the Upper House inquiry, that was what both government at the time, Liberal National members said, as well as Labor, very strongly, that it's very clear that the laws are unfair to medicinal cannabis patients. They haven't kept up. The driving laws haven't kept up with the fact that cannabis is now a legal medicine, and how can we change it? The interesting thing, of course, is the fact we've now got a Labor government. We've got various ministers and the Premier himself who have spoken positively in the past in terms of drug law reform. And in fact, we've had a couple of Labor ministers who have made noises over the past couple of weeks. Most of you would know, I think, that Labor has committed for years and years and years, said that they do a drug summit and basically haven't committed to anything else in terms of public policy, haven't committed at all in terms of drug law reform, but that they'll do a drug summit. We're hearing that that is looking likely now not to be in the first few months of government, which is what they said originally during the campaign, but early next year, which is about 12 months away. I think we need to move and should move sooner than that on reforming our drug driving laws. And it's so exciting actually to hear where Victoria is up to, because clearly Victoria is going to move before New South Wales does. But you think we've got a Premier, Chris Minns, who likes to copy Dan Andrews in everything he does, the Dan Andrews model, so maybe he'll look at that with interest. I certainly will be giving notice of the bill again, the bill that we debated last year in the Upper House and it didn't pass. Labor didn't support it, but they did make sympathetic noises. We'll certainly be doing that again, but not just to put it up and have it fail. We'll put it there to give notice that we intend to make this an issue that won't go away. And so importantly now in New South Wales, we do have the balance of power in the Upper House. Like everything that the Labor government wants to progress from the progressive side of things, whether it be environment legislation, planning laws, drug laws, they need the Greens' support to pass it, as well as another legalised cannabis rep. So that's very, very exciting. We are certainly hoping that we are going to see whether we can get anything done before the drug summit. But just finishing on, we've been saying publicly in terms of the drug summit that everything has already been put out by the ICE inquiry in terms of recommendations. It's very clear what we need to do in the drug space, and we haven't been actively supporting a drug summit. But it's clear Labor's going to do a drug summit, right? They're going to do it. And we have to look at that as the best opportunity we have had in a long time to get not just piecemeal change, but really, really significant reform. And I don't think clearly we need a drug summit to change our drug driving laws. We will certainly see if we can do that before then, and obviously if Victoria goes before us. But the drug summit is really, really exciting in terms of legalised, well, I didn't say that. I don't mean the drug summit's really exciting, but we do have to, they have to do stuff, right? They will not go to the drug summit, given all of their statements, Chris Minn's statements in the past. He's been the patron for drug law reform, Labor, drug law reform in the Parliament. He's been a parliamentary patron. Interesting history in this space. So he gets it. We have to look at that collectively as a way we can achieve change in New South Wales, as opposed to looking at it with cynicism. So I'll certainly be doing as much as I can, because now in the next 12 months is so critical for us to work together to, get the public awareness campaign from about here in this space to absolutely blasting through the ceiling by the time that drug summit comes around.
Sue.
Yeah, awesome. I think anybody in this space knows what a serious legend and influencer Cate is inside the Parliament on this work. Everyone knows that the way the Parliament is currently constituted means that Cate is going to see some serious success in the very short term. I think the only thing I would add at this point is Cate's kind of spoken about how we do hold the progressive balance in the upper house, but what's really, really fundamental too is the fact that Minns doesn't actually have a majority Labor government. He has got a minority Labor government and relies on the crossbench in the lower house. So the Greens are incredibly valuably positioned right now, because we actually hold the balance in the lower and the upper house. So we've got three incredible women, the two very experienced MPs, one of our local MPs from Ballina and the new MP from Balmain. So they join a progressive crossbench in the lower house, all of whom we're already talking to about all of our progressive agendas, particularly this one, and they know damn well that this is what they put to Minns. So we've already had some conversations with some of the crossbenchers. There's also the new Labor MPs in the upper house who are pretty much on the record on this issue too. And we've got people like Stephen Lawrence's and the people who have worked in the criminal justice system and watched this stuff firsthand and know the absurdity of the current New South Wales laws. So there has never actually been a better time in New South Wales than what there is right now in this new Parliament. We know the opportunity is early, and we know we've got the feisty woman onto it early. So we're very excited.
I think it's also interesting, I've written before that in my view, the three main organs of impediment, as I call them, to drug law reform in Australia are the police themselves, and I mean the senior police, the pharmaceutical industry, who has had so much to worry about, the alcohol industry, I know this is four but I can't count, and the Murdoch press. Universally, the Murdoch press has been strident and against drug law reform. Now, what happened in Queensland when they announced their law reform, they said, the Attorney General said, this was at the initiative of the Police Commissioner, and they had lined up 4 past Police Commissioners, all of whom were there in person or in writing, supporting this drug law reform. The Murdoch press was absolutely silent. The Courier Mail, who has been so anti-drug law reform forever, was completely silent on this, mostly because they had a win on locking up more young Aboriginal people on the same day, but completely silent and not boo even from the pharmaceutical or the alcohol industries. Of course, the opposition said soft on crime, but their whole focus was on the pill testing, not on the decriminalisation. Now, so that's some lessons on the powers that be in New South Wales. We do have a new police commissioner. She does seem far more reasonable on this sort of stuff. And I've been very critical of the last 4 police commissioners who dare to speak out well beyond their brief. They're public servants. They're meant to follow the direction of Parliament, not set the direction. The police submission to the ICE inquiry was one of the, if you really want to get yourself mad, read that. Similarly, with the New South Wales Health Department submission to Kate's Upper House inquiry on drug driving law reform, where they just blatantly said that except for childhood epilepsy, there is no proof that cannabis works for anything at all, ever. And that was the New South Wales Health line. So there seems to be a coalescence of stars lining up for drug law reform. And after all, if it works in now I should say that in Queensland and the ACT, who have the best drug laws, neither of them currently are moving on drug driving. And that is extremely disappointing because, as I said at the start, my nightmare scenario is we get fantastic drug law reform and the drug driving laws stay the same. And make no mistake, the big lie in the drug driving debate is that this will cause deaths, that here's the number of people with cannabis in their system that die and cause deaths every year on our roads. That is just a lie. David.
Yeah, I think all of us who have been doing work in this space are sick of the lie being told by the different state and federal transport authorities. And they make this false correlation causation argument. We know that around about 10% of the population smoke cannabis at any one point, in a given year. And so when they look at the road trauma data, if there's ever been any road trauma or fatalities, and they get a test of the blood of the drivers involved, they find in about 8 to 10% of occasions that people have trace elements of cannabis in the system. And therefore they say, oh, well, look at that. We see cannabis being a cause of those traffic accidents. But of course, if you're testing for the slightest perceptible presence of cannabis, there's absolutely no evidence at all that that caused any of those traffic fatalities. But they keep bowling up the same bogus evidence that if they'd presented in a sort of year 12 essay to their science teacher, would have been thrown out as absolute junk science. It's junk science, but they keep coming up with the same junk science, and it is so bloody frustrating. And I'm sure we've all experienced that at different times.
And I think it's disgusting also because, of course, the majority of deaths on the road occur from 18 to 25-year-olds. Now, they're going to, if 10% of the whole population, what's 18 to 25-year-olds going to be?
26%.
Yeah, 26%. And then not all of those road deaths were to blame. So if I'm sitting there really stoned in my car and someone T-bones me and I die, that is not a cannabis-caused death.
No. And they refuse to look at and interrogate the data on benzodiazepines, which is, from international studies, much more likely to be a serious cause of road trauma because you can literally be zonked to your eyeballs on benzodiazepines and be waved through in and out of Nimbin. It's bizarre.
Yeah, one of the interesting things in the progress and the journey of this debate in Victoria was when I put the bill up last term, and the government, agreed that this should go to a task force and there should be some expert work on it. Now, this task force, I was a member of it. You couldn't find a consensus. The one police member would not engage in any really meaningful way. The road safety people were actually much more engaged and said, look, we can do this. And they were using examples of benzodiazepines and the type of processes there. But what the outcome of that was that there was 3 studies. The Premier in taking on the task force report, said, okay, we need to do more work there. We will fund 3 studies, and these were 2 Swinburne studies and a Monash study. That was looking at this exact issue and looking at the exact issue, but with medicinal cannabis patients. And those reports have come back very promising, and have given this government the confidence to move ahead with a trial, as Rachel and David have talked about. So yeah, it's been a journey, but we've had some positive steps along the way.
Thanks heaps. Did any of you want to reflect on the TGA material that I referred to and its importance? Oh, well, that's a no.
You go, David.
I guess probably only anecdotally. When we first started, Fiona was sort of guiding us around and introducing us to ministers, and it was exactly when it was the week after the TGA announcement. So it was like, this is about cannabis and this is about blah, 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 blah. And Health Minister, what do you think about the TGA announcement on MDMA and psilocybin? And there's all of the minders are all like, where the fuck did that come from? That was the overwhelming at the state level. And I think it's a great surprise. It's a reflection, though, and as I think you said before, David, about the fact that the politicians, by and large, are just so far behind where the community's at, And I know I always thought of politicians as leaders, but in fact, politicians are weather vanes. They get directed by the wind, by where people are thinking. And in the case of cannabis, in the case of MDMA and psilocybin, the community, I think, is so far ahead of the politicians that it's a case of catch up. And as much as anything, what we're to do, our job is to say, catch up. Let's catch up with our community and provide sensible regulation and a sensible framework for reform. And the time's now. The time's right.
Great.
Well, it didn't come out of nowhere. I want to acknowledge there's been a whole lot of researchers, academics and campaigners for decades in this space. And in fact, the studies that are coming out around the world as to the impacts of MDMA and psilocybin in particular treatments of treatment-resistant depression, PTSD, that body of global evidence has now become pretty much unstoppable. And even though the AMA and some really conservative parts of the medical industry, I would say, and Rachel and I were just saying this earlier, really influenced by Big Pharma in that and the money of Big Pharma, even though they desperately want to push against it, the body of global evidence now is so strong that the TGA actually listened to the evidence. Yep. And it's not without restrictions, but having got that through, as of 1 July, what really scares Big Pharma is that there's now going to be the capacity to do a whole lot more research and study with a whole lot less restrictions and much lower cost entry. And it's going to produce, I think, an unstoppable wave of further evidence from Australia at just how effective these 2 drugs are at treating things that Big Pharma are currently making gazillions of dollars from and not fixing. And it's actually really exciting.
And I think the reality is the mental health crisis is so high and is impacting absolutely everyone that the evidence has penetrated. That's kind of what's happened.
We've actually seen in Victoria that the state government actually funded 2 psychedelic trials, one with terminally ill patients on end-of-life anxiety, and the other on drug-resistant anxiety, and that treatment-resistant anxiety, and they've both been government funded. So I think that came out of our Mental Health Royal Commission, that we need to try to have different tools in our toolbox.
Just a really quick anecdote too on this. About 3 years ago, I was kind of raising this issue in budget estimates as the mental health spokesperson for the Greens, as well as the drug law reform spokesperson, and was raising it with the mental health minister, the National Party mental health minister, Bronnie Taylor, and her chief psychiatrist, asking if they were aware of the incredible emerging research and impacts and effects and benefits. nothing. They looked at me at that point 3 years ago as though I was just talking about the most outrageous, what on earth is this woman on about? Chief psychiatrist was like, what? And anyway, I got Mind Medicine Australia and others before them, and of course they've been lobbied by others and probably had research come across their desk. But the next time I asked the chief psychiatrist, which was I think about 12 months ago now, 18 months ago, in budget estimates, the change was incredible. He did not mind. I thought he might say something to me privately and just put the bluff on that still it wasn't a good idea. But he said, yes, Kate, there's very, very good evidence that in fact that does, provide some hope for treatment-resistant conditions, and we're looking at that very closely. This is National Party, Liberal National government in New South Wales just 18 months ago. So I don't know, it was such a huge surprise. I feel like behind the scenes and people in that space were kind of knowing it was happening, and they were really, really, really hoping it wasn't going to blow up in the media and it was just going to happen almost on the quiet, because I think they wanted it to happen, actually, most mental health ministers and health ministers around the country.
Yeah, thanks. And of course, the biggest cause of death for 18 to 40-year-old males now is suicide, and 18 to 25-year-old females, so it is a mental health crisis. And of course, medicinal cannabis has proven its role in that as well. The two things are connected. But it struck me this morning, I listened to a lot of the medical sessions, and I always do with great attention, and Dr. Tay was up here. There's a doctor from Victoria, I'm not sure if she's still here, talking about her experience with drug driving patients. In the law, lawyers and lawyer groups around the country have generally been pretty good on drug law reform. What is it with the AMA? I mean, maybe David's hitting the nail on the head, but even on drug driving in Victoria, I saw their press release, which was, well, we don't want more people dying on the roads. I mean, the most totally non-evidence-based bullshit I've ever read. And New South Wales experienced pretty much the same. What is wrong with these doctors?
Can I just say, watch this space on this, because I actually think that there is an element of change occurring, and I think all of the work that has been done over the years, the evidence that is amassing, they're actually finding it difficult. And in fact, we've seen the Pharmaceutical Society turn their policies on this. We're seeing a whole range of organisations starting to change, and so I think, I think we're kind of close with the AMA. And the AMA has been great on things like drug decriminalisation. Like, they have been supportive of that for many years at state and federal levels. And I think that when I was initiating the supervised injecting room, we had the AMA as one of our campaigners who held hands with us on that. So we'll get them over the line, and with people like Karen Hitchcock in there to influence from the inside, it will happen. Yeah,
I think that they have occasionally been good in the space, but they're an incredibly conservative organisation. And I don't think they're genuinely representing the breadth of doctors across the country. And in fact, I actually think we've seen a lot more courage from, say, the Royal College of GPs, who are getting a stronger and louder voice, seeing it with their patients more directly. And I think the strength of the Royal College of GPs, state and federal, and Kate, you may have dealt with them in the health portfolio, they really get it, because they're the people talking to people, their patients coming in, having these experiences, reflecting it back. I think that I have a lot more faith in the GPs forcing change in the AMA than it coming from the AMA down.
They didn't help on driving. They're still not over. We haven't got the Royal College over the line just yet on driving. Yeah.
One of the good news stories for us, the New South Wales state election, is one of the women who's joined Kate and I in the New South Wales Upper House now, who was going to be here but apologised and couldn't, is Dr. Amanda Cohen. So we've now got this amazing young woman regional GP, former Deputy Mayor of Albury, who's now in the New South Wales Upper House, who will be chairing, we assume, the Health Committee in the Upper House, and we think we are going to be able to make significant inroads into this discussion through her and her expertise in the Parliament as well.
Yep, brilliant. Now, we are going to have time for a couple of questions. Rules. They are questions, not whole life speeches. Yes.
Okay, I was going to say I did have a whole live speech here, but John, can you keep it really quick?
Yeah, it's about the Queensland situation, which I think you need to understand what happened in that. In 2019, the Queensland Productivity Commission did an inquiry into the prison conditions in Queensland. Prison populations had doubled between 2010 and 2018 in Queensland, and prison capacity was at 130%. They were looking at having to build 2 new prisons, and that was going to cost $5.6 billion. So the Queensland Productivity Commission made a series of recommendations. And to explain the prison population a bit, about 10% are there with drugs as their major contributors, and about 30% are First Nations people. And what the figures they came up with was that they could save $800 million if they just decriminalised cannabis, and $1.2 billion if they decriminalised all drugs. And they sat on that for about 4 years, and now they've finally done it. Like, I thought they were just going to bury it. But that's what's happened, is that...
Great.
One thing to remember is that the cost of prisons is going up because prison populations are exploding, and that's a really good reason for decriminalising drugs.
Thanks very much, John.
Thanks, John. That's
Yes.
great.
Questions?
One from Will.
Yes.
Hello, my name is Will Trugunning. I'm the CEO of campaign organisation Unharm. A very brief comment about Queensland, and it actually is to frame a question. The police were the major driver of the law reform that we saw in Queensland. The primary purpose was to make law enforcement more efficient for police. We've seen diversion schemes like that roll out across Australia, and the result has been a massive increase in consumer drug arrests. My concern is that this is more of the same. There are plenty of racist police in Queensland, and they use drug laws as a pretext to stop and search whomever they want. If you don't see campaigns that are driven by broad-based social movements, be extremely suspicious about the outcomes that they achieve. So my question is, given that there are, for example, the rate of arrests of Aboriginal people, for example, in New South Wales is 5 times higher for cannabis offences than it is for non-Aboriginal people. Aboriginal people are more likely to be strip searched than non-Aboriginal people. They're more likely to receive a charge, whereas a person like me would receive a caution. And in addition to that, police hand out charges to people in less wealthy areas, where in poorer areas they... where in wealthier areas they issue cautions. I'm not hearing a lot about the racial and social justice issues inherent in drug law reform. I'm conscious that as a white person, it's something that's a really important work that we need to do in bringing that into the movement. It's not the responsibility of people who have historically been subjected to racism to undo racism and colonialism. With that in mind, what do you think we can do, or what are you already doing to better integrate drug law reform work with racial and social justice?
Thanks for that, Will. Look,
Can I take that one?
I will,
Yeah.
but I just want to say this, that the discretion models like Queensland are subject to exactly the kinds of thing you're talking about. But the bills that Cate and David are putting up, and also the drug driving proposals in Victoria, are not discretion-based programs. In fact, they are universal programs. And I agree entirely that universal programs are much less subject than police discretion-based programs. Having said that, yes, Sue, David, yep.
Oh, well, Will, yeah, and thanks for the work, and I acknowledge the work of Unharm.
Yeah, me too.
Has been really important in the space. So one of the reasons, our principal reason for legalising cannabis federally is because we don't trust state police and state parliaments to get rid of these kind of discretionary powers, which we know, as you point out, are overwhelmingly used against First Nations people, people in poorer communities, people of colour. That's how police discretion works. If you're wealthy and white, it works in your favour. If you're not, you get fucked over by the system. And that's actually, I think, the neatest definition of police discretion I've ever had before. And so legalising cannabis takes away that interaction between police and particularly people in poorer parts of the country and particularly First Nations people, stopping that interaction from happening in the first place. And one of the principal reasons police are in the face of First Nations peoples is because it's on a suspicion of cannabis possession. And it starts from a suspicion of cannabis possession to maybe offensive language, maybe they move to arrest, maybe it becomes resist arrest, assault police, bang, you've suddenly got a really serious charge. And it all starts from police using their discretion, approaching someone, a First Nations person, on using potential possession of cannabis. And if we take that away, we know that nationally 80,000 negative interactions which lead to criminal charges will be removed. And we see harm reduction as a core part of legalised cannabis. I said this before in our legalised cannabis bill. The principal harm that we want to reduce doesn't come from the plant. It actually comes from those interactions with police, and we don't want police discretion in that space. We wanted a hard and fast rule.
Can I just add to that as well in terms of New South Wales? Absolutely, the drug laws are racist laws. But it wouldn't be right to not kind of add, so are all our criminal laws and so is so much of our system in New South Wales and policing. And in terms of the Greens' approach to the racism and the injustice and the system and the criminal justice system, yes, drug law reform is one thing that we're working frontline, all efforts, but we are doing this across all of our justice work in New South Wales in relation to First Nations. We've got a First Nations network that informs us as Greens MPs about how we have to work at every single level in the colonial institution of Parliament to stop the racism that we're facing, whether it's, forced removals, etc. So I just think it's really important to say, yes, we know well and truly these are racist laws, but so are just about all the other laws that First Nations are facing on the street, in their homes, and in every institution.
Yeah, David. Sorry. Yeah.
D1. Thanks, D1 and D2. Look, basically, what they said, absolutely. And in Victoria, we're working with Victorian Aboriginal Legal Service and community-controlled health organisations and pushing forward those items. In Victoria, it'll be interesting to watch this space over the next 6 to 12 months because the government is coming to a point where it's got two really significant issues. One is age criminality and the second is bail reform. And we're seeing this hyper-incarceration of Indigenous people, particularly Indigenous women. And we're seeing this as an opportunity not simply to attack these issues on their merit because they are critically in need of reform, but also at the same time to try and weave into that debate the broader questions of harm minimisation and broader questions of drug normalisation. And so we're looking forward over the next 6 to 12 months for the opportunity to really take it to the government, not only to be progressive on those issues, but also the broader harm minimisation and drug reform issues that are central to why we're standing up here today.
Just say quickly, David, sorry, we also have a lot of work to do, Will, over the next 12 months to make sure that whatever is considered and debated and discussed at the New South Wales Drug Summit, that it is a full decriminalisation model, ideally, that comes out the other end, and that all of the risks that you're saying, and rightly so, and that David and Sue and others have talked about in terms of diversionary programs, that they are clearly articulated, that we work with First Nations groups as well as all our stakeholders to make sure that we pressure Labor, pressure everybody there to make sure we get full decriminalisation, and that's what we'll be campaigning on from day one in the new Parliament. We'll continue that, and let's connect about how best to do that together.
Can I just add two things on this? One, the Victorian Police drug strategy, 2022 to 2025, non-discretionary diversion is within that plan. Now, it's not written into that strategy document, but it's within the work plan of the Victorian Police. So there is considerable support for a non-discretionary diversion program moving towards decriminalisation. Two, we have a treaty process underway and a URUC process, and I can tell you drug decriminalisation is in that. And the third one is the recent coroner's report on Veronica Nelson, an Aboriginal woman who died in custody from heroin withdrawal. Nobody in our society should be dying from the withdrawal of heroin, and she did under the care of the state. Now, the coroner was fierce about the need for drug law reform and for the decriminalisation of drugs. And that report, that coroner's report, will not go unnoticed, as David mentioned, when we start talking about bail law reform and raising the age of criminal responsibility in Victoria. So I think there's a few elements to this that will ensure that Aboriginal voice and the importance and the exponential impact that our terrible drug laws have had on our Aboriginal brothers and sisters is heard.
Thank you. So I think we need to wrap up. Doing so, I will say this. Western Australia, we haven't touched on. But of course there, the Labor Party has an overwhelming majority and can just simply ignore the legalised cannabis and Greens candidates in the upper house. Now, arguably, Queensland is in a pretty similar situation and they didn't have an upper house, but we've heard some of the history of that. But what this panel shows me more than anything else, and I jokingly answered a question this morning in my earlier session, what can I tell my drug driving patients? I said, tell them to vote. And this panel shows the power of our pen. If it wasn't for these folk who, and I know some of them really well and some less so, but if it wasn't for these folks standing up for what they believe in, putting their beliefs on the line, being prepared to lose elections and suffer that sort of shame and whatever that goes with that, but really putting themselves out there, we would not be in this reasonably optimistic position that we're in now. I hear a lot of apathy. I hear a lot of apathy and depression in our movement, and I'm fucking sick of it too. You know, every year rolling up, it's MardiGrass time again. You know, well, what are we going to say? Let's try and spin it a different way. Same old story. We're all sick of it, but voting and getting our friends and family and colleagues and medicinal cannabis users and psilocybin and MDMA and PTSD and near-death depression and every cancer patients, we need to get them out there and we need to get them voting progressively, because that is the only way we're going to get this over the line. So thank you to each of the panellists.
Go the Greens.
And again, really, thank you so much for coming and the participation and your energy and commitment. Let's go and march and make our voices heard. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much, David.